I've practiced permaculture for 5 years and received 2 certifications, which set the groundwork for me to develop new dental devices. So in this video, I'm going to explain how sustainability relates to dentistry. So this is the Jade tooth project, and if you're new to permaculture, it encompasses a lot. Some think it's synonymous with organic gardening, but in reality, it's a design science for the creation of sustainable communities and regenerative communities. It includes landscape design, syntropic agriculture, agroforestry specifically, natural building, water and waste management, community coherence, and more. My education and experience in permaculture laid the groundwork, laid the intellectual foundation for all that this channel is about, everything I'm doing here. And that's because all the thousands of hours I've dedicated to permaculture, ecology, sustainability, and the like can all be distilled down to one core insight, which changed my life and my work. And that insight is that non-toxicity is the same thing as health. They're completely synonymous. So this applies to every domain of life: mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health, in individuals, in communities, in ecosystems, and even in animals. So how did I learn this from permaculture? Well, like I said, I went through 2 trainings, and I learned some permaculture principles as a theoretical part of my training. And one of these principles really stuck with me and stood out, and that is use biological resources. So I define biological not as contrasted against mineral. I define biological as contrasted against synthetic. So I'm also defining synthetic not as made by humans, but rather as industrially produced with petrochemicals and toxic metals. So to give you an idea of what I'm trying to communicate, think about a place where petrochemicals and toxic metals are super abundant, like outside of a power plant or a factory or something like that, maybe a agrochemical farm. And notice how these places and the people that live in these places and all of the animals and really all life around them, how the gene expression of the life is completely altered. The survival, the efficient function, and the beauty, all of the gene expression relating to these things are disrupted, and disease and suffering are generated. This is not too hard to see, for me at least, and it's a pretty stark contrast for me between somewhere that has been kept very clean, very pure, for example, an organic garden, or a small village that's been fairly isolated from industry. I feel like a lot of people haven't traveled sufficiently to notice this contrast really heavily, but I have, and maybe that's why it's so obvious for me. But someone who spends their entire life inside of an environment with this sort of chemical disruption, they won't know anything else. But industry has largely touched a lot of the world, and that's why there aren't very many examples actually of incredibly pure places. There are some, but they're few and far between. So I can just speak from my experience. I've cultivated an organic garden before. You could call it a small food forest that I grew. And I grew this in a place which had been completely disrupted and decimated by chemicals and industry. But what I noticed is the more organic I kept things, the more life came in, the more healthy and beautiful and abundant the expression of that life was and became. And as a result, the more time I spent generating that health in that environment, the healthier I became. So it's very synergistic. And if you haven't had that sort of experience to give you that contrast, just listen to the words and notice how they make you feel when I contrast these two realms. So some examples of some words for the life-bringing regenerative aspect that I'm referring to are eco-village, regeneration, organic, life, biological, purity. How do these words make you feel? What kind of images do they evoke in you? And now contrast that against words like pesticide or poison or factory or extraction or oil or plastic. What images do these words evoke? What kind of feelings do they give you inside? To me, even the words themselves sound just like what they are. They sound, those latter words sound much harsher and make me feel like definitely less happy inside. So hopefully that can display my point a little bit. And when I was building this garden, when I was planting out this food forest, completely organically, I noticed how those small things which I couldn't keep organic, which were out of my control. For example, if someone else came into my garden and put a piece of metal somewhere, or there was a painted wall next to where I was cultivating, or if there was some plastic pollution around, or if there was pesticides leaching in from the neighbor's yard, or if there was some chemical potting soil that was brought in and spilled by different people's potted plants. Well, I just noticed how life wouldn't exist here. It became totally sterile, totally dead. But those pockets that I kept free of these things, that's where all the life came in. And that's where I wanted to grow my food, where there's tons of fungi and insects and black soil and plant life, what a lot of people would call weeds, you know? All of those organisms, the biodiversity of organisms, that is, to me, what health is. And I see that the more of that there is, the more health for everyone surrounding there will be. And learning this principle of using biological resources in permaculture, what it did for me is it reshaped the way that I saw the world and the way that I interact with everything in my life. And I started getting really extreme with it and applying it everywhere just to see what would happen, because I intuited that there's really something to it. And yeah, it's helped me. It's really given me back a lot of aspects of my health and allowed me to feel like I'm being a regenerative force on Earth, and seeing the results of that, seeing how it changes the way that I think and the way that other people think and talk and act and feel. It makes a huge difference, actually. So another principle that I learned in my permaculture training was to use locally available resources whenever possible. And I started applying this too, and seeing how I could start meeting my needs from what's around me. And this really compounded the previous principle that I was talking about, and it connected me back to my ancestors in a way, because for so many millions of years, my ancestors and everyone's ancestors were doing this naturally. They had no other option. They were using biological resources. They were using locally available resources. That's what they evolved with. That's what our genetics are programmed to interact with, and the environment they're meant to be expressed in. So doing this has only improved my health. And what I've realized is it takes a lot more effort than just not doing this by just following along with society and industry and, I don't know, getting any job and like being passive and just buying whatever the corporations want you to buy, and like going to the store and getting everything you need. You know, it takes a lot more effort, actually. It may seem like it's so hard to get by in the system, but it's even harder to rebel against the system, I've found, and to chart a new path, because the system is so ubiquitous on Earth, because industry has touched every corner of this planet and taken control of a lot of people's lives, and supply chains and habits, like the habitual behaviors of everyone on Earth is favoring industrial systems and toxic systems. So to fight uphill against this, it really takes some extra energy because of the cultural context we're living in. But I do think that if everyone on Earth, even if 30% of the Earth started to apply what I'm talking about, it would suddenly become a whole lot easier for those people to feel supported in being a regenerative force and using local biological resources. Suddenly it wouldn't take so much effort to find the bits of purity that exist. It would just be the case. And I'm really looking forward to the day when that is the case, because then I think people are actually going to be able to relax and feel good just by default. The system will encourage it, but right now it doesn't. So this brings me into this channel, the Jade Tooth Project, and and dentistry. So how does all of this relate back to our teeth and what dentists are doing, what orthodontists are doing? Well, basically I started realizing as I was applying this in every aspect of my life, I realized that all dentists, you know, when I felt like I had to go to a dentist and when I realized like what had been done to me by dental industry, I realized the entire industry is using these toxic materials. It's only using petrochemicals and toxic metals. So this was really concerning and disappointing for me. And even when I investigated deeper, I couldn't find a single dentist not subscribing to this system and using toxic materials on people. So my realization was, if I wouldn't put something in my garden, if I don't want it around the food that I'm growing, why would I put it in my mouth? And that really got to me and has been a big motivating question for me to find a solution for. And even the biological dentists aren't being biological. They're not using biological materials. I don't know why they're called biological dentists when they're not embodying that whatsoever. You know, I feel like a lot of them think it's a question of efficacy, like, well, these are the materials that work. They've been proven to work. And my perspective is, have they really been proven to work? How long have they been around? Like, a lot of these materials were invented in the last couple decades. And like dentistry, the modern dentistry that we see today is actually so new to life on Earth, to humanity's evolution, and these are unproven technologies that they're putting into millions and millions, even billions of people. We don't know the long-term ramifications of doing this. Well, actually, I feel like I do. I know the long-term ramifications of this, and it is not good. It's disease, it's malformities, and it's cultural ailment. It's cultural disease too. You know, these things extend beyond just our bodies, our individual experience. Like, they affect the people around us. They affect our families, our communities, and even when we piss out the toxic materials, that goes into the ecosystem, that affects the animal life around us, and it affects other humans, and it creates toxic waste. Like, I literally don't want someone who has amalgam in their mouth to pee in my compost toilet, because like that's putting mercury into the fertilizer that I would then be putting on my plants. So like, really, these things matter, and they're not inconsequential. They have to be dealt with at some point by someone. And who takes the brunt of this? Nature. The mushrooms, the insects, the animals, the plants, they're the first to receive this disease and toxicity. So it affects everything. It affects everyone. I think it could also be generational trauma with dentists. Like, so many of them just have been forced into the position that they're in by their families, by their lineages, by the programming that comes from their parents, whether it's being forced to get a job for money or to feel a sense of accomplishment and being professional, being an accomplished person. Or, I don't know, I think there are actually some really sick, twisted dentists out there who may enjoy seeing people's pain and like secretly it kind of titillates them to cause harm to people. I don't know, I just don't have any other explanation for this. Like, it must be such deep generational trauma that causes people to go into this line of work where they can bear to do this to people. I have trouble understanding it, but these are my theories. So this has sent me on a hunt for what could possibly be a truly non-toxic and functional solution for dental restorations, because no one else offered them, no one has provided them for me, so it's left me to speculate and theorize and start inventing, start developing concepts and solutions, because I need them. I don't feel like there's any other option. I've been cornered into this. They say necessity is the driver of innovation, and here's a prime example of that. So I went into deep research with the help of AI, and I really think this is where AI is best utilized. I made sure to use, some ecologically friendly servers and models that help me to develop these concepts, but what I've found is it only took me a few weeks of dedicated and intensive research to find some really good solutions. And that's why I think it's so absurd that no one's done this yet. But I guess it's my role, huh? My solutions are pretty simple at the end of the day. They're just minerals and bioplastics, and that's it. It's so simple. I mean, it sounds simple, but really it's been incredibly complex to figure out what specific materials, what specific minerals and bioplastics are actually non-toxic and are actually ethical, which can work, which can last a long time, which are compatible in an oral environment, and how can they be put together? How can these ingredients be mixed so that it creates a permanent solution for people? I wouldn't say it's been easy, but it's been quick, like embarrassingly quick for the dental industry, considering they've had hundreds of years to figure this out, and they're still doing the same thing. In fact, they're actually doubling down. It's crazy. I just heard, like, mewing in the UK, there was a litigation for like 10 years, and the courts ruled in favor of the dental industry, basically unwilling to admit that they've been wrong for many years, that their methods and their techniques, which are anti-science actually, which are not proven and have a lot of evidence against them, anecdotal and scientific evidence, to prove otherwise. Yeah, they're just kind of brushing it all off and turning a blind eye to it all. So that's unfortunately where we're at right now in the Western world, and I really hope the tides turn someday soon and the institutions and systems start waking up to the harm that they're doing to people and the unnecessary effort and expense and damage that they're causing. But anyways, back to permaculture. I see a lot of parallels, in fact, between natural building and what's happening with my developments in this realm of natural dentistry, you could call it, non-toxic dentistry. And a lot of parallels between what's happening in conventional construction and conventional dentistry. It's remarkable, actually, how many similarities there are. So I'll start with the conventional stuff. Basically, on a large scale, like, there's 4 quadrants of the mouth. This is how they look at the mouth in conventional dentistry, and yeah, it makes sense. Like, there's some symmetry. There's a double symmetry. So there's 4 quadrants in the mouth, and that's how they build homes. Like, they build 4 corners. Like, it's a cubic kind of geometry, and that's just something interesting to notice. Like, the number 4 is prevalent. And on that note, the concept of building a cube as a stable structure is actually fairly ridiculous and nonsensical, because if you took a cube, like, let's say you built a cube out of straws that were attached with string. If you tried to stand it up on its own, it would just collapse. It would fall right over, because the shape of a cube actually doesn't have any inherent tensegrity. It's called any inherent internal structural integrity. And that's why they have to reinforce homes with metal and concrete and plastic and whatever they do, you know, all these petrochemicals. But at the core of it, like, you'll see a lot of diagonal, triangular beams, and even at the microscopic level, when they're welding and putting beams together, there's triangular geometries present that are actually giving it its strength and stability and structure. So this hyperfixation on cubic geometry of squares, it's very representative and reflective of the kind of inefficiency and just irrational thinking that the conventional system tends to utilize. So, more similarities between what's happening in conventional dentistry and in conventional construction is, another one is mold. People's mouths are literally molding, and that's why they have to go in, that's why they feel like they have to go in with all these toxic chemicals and kill things all the time. Well, it ends up killing the people too, and this is just this is exactly the same thing that's happening in home construction and in the construction of buildings around the world. concrete, wood, plastic, metal, glass. These are the materials that they use to build. And, well, with the exception of metal and glass, you know, these things mold. Drywall molds, like concrete even molds. Wood definitely molds, even if it's treated with toxic chemicals. Eventually it's going to mold or get eaten by termites or whatever. Like, plastic molds, maybe a lot of people might think it doesn't, but I guarantee you it does. With enough time, humidity, and heat, plastic will degrade and does degrade by fungi. So, of course, when they use the same materials in people's mouths, cement, plastic, petrochemicals, like, these things mold. And then we wonder why, like, people's teeth are falling out of their mouths by the time they're 50 or 60 and sometimes earlier. Like, yeah, maybe you should just use nature. Like, use nature's solutions. They're right there. So, there's also a similarity with drilling. And I find this quite funny. It's funny because it's true and it's scary too. In modern dentistry, they're drilling into people's mouths and teeth and jawbones all the time. And they're burning into it with lasers and all sorts of crazy stuff, like just the same as they're doing to homes. Said before, they're treating people's mouths like they're construction materials. They even use screws. Dental implants are literally screws, metal screws that they put into people's jawbones after drilling a pilot hole. So it's the same type of thinking that's producing the same type of results, which is destruction and degeneration and disease. People get sick from the materials that their homes are built with, and they're getting sick from the materials that are put in their mouths and the techniques that are being used. I also find a similarity to be the cookie cutter fixes that they use, like the cookie cutter nature of the solutions that they provide. Completely standardized, completely completely disregarding of the individual case. They may, think that they're tailoring it to people by doing scans and precise cutting using different mills and who knows what they're doing, 3D printing stuff, I don't know. Like, this is not individualized. Just because it's fit to someone's mouth doesn't mean it's actually individualized to someone's scenario. And they're doing the same with homes, cookie cutter homes. I grew up in a home like this. A home that looks exactly like the neighbor's home. And that home looks exactly like their neighbor's home. And the entire neighborhood looks the same. And all of the people living in the homes are completely unique and individual people. But they end up acting the same because they're all treated the same. And I think this uniformity is really not the way that our genetics would like to be treated. I think when we start seeing actually individualized solutions for people, then health can be restored. And that's why I don't think that what I'm suggesting should be mass produced. I think inherently should be a decentralized, individualized, specially tailored thing, and it should evolve. It should receive tweaks and modifications by different people, by different cultures, to fit their specific cultural context, their biological and genetic context. I don't know, there's just never one size fits all. It doesn't work like that. It never ends up working. So these cookie cutter fixes, they're ineffective and they don't last long. Cookie cutter homes, you'll be lucky if they don't get eaten by termites or colonized by mold, or if everything doesn't start breaking down after 20 years inside of the home, all the technology needs to be replaced. And that's like best case scenario. Sometimes you fix something and then a year later it breaks in this conventional system, or even a week later. These fixes just aren't permanent, and that's kind of where the word permaculture comes from. It comes from permanent culture, permanent agriculture. It's about finding what's been working for millennia, and it's not actually about doing one thing and having it stay that way forever. That's not what is meant by permanent or permaculture. It's about sustainability. It's about being able to find something that is not going to result in constant maintenance, constant energy input, constant inefficiency and wastefulness and pollution. It's kind of contradictory and paradoxical. The permanent solutions sometimes are the ones that are embracing change the most, are embracing compostability and degradation. But on the other hand, sometimes, generally, they end up lasting longer than the conventional solutions. If they're done right. So I find this really fascinating. It is paradoxical, but it can be observed. It's real. For example, I think these dental solutions that I'm developing could last for someone's lifetime. And if you build a house right, it's never going to break. The systems are just going to keep running. You don't have to redesign. You don't have to reinvent. You don't have to maintain constantly. It's going to create a path of least resistance. So the mouth, I see it as the home of the body. And this is the final parallel that I'm going to point out between construction and dental work. The mouth, the Chinese, the ancient Chinese from traditional Chinese medicine, they view the mouth as connected to pretty much every system in the body. If you look at meridian charts of the teeth, you can see actually individual teeth are connected to different systems elsewhere in the body. And this is observable, this is provable. And you might have even heard from conventional orthodontists or dentists that oral health is the foundation of overall health. And really they glean this insight from traditional Chinese medicine. It's true. If you have a dental infection, God, your life is not going to be of a high quality. It's going to ruin everything. It's going to distract from feeling good at all moments, and it's also going to produce disease in other parts of the body, and it can kill people. So it's like the foundational organ of our bodies, and when you think about it, it makes sense. That's where food first goes in. That's where water first goes in. That's where breath first goes in. It's the life-giving entrance to our whole systems. And that's what a home is. It's what a home should be. It's where our life is rooted. So I see a lot of really fascinating parallels here. And when it comes to permaculture and natural building, it's just the same. When you start regenerating on the home scale, then the similarities are just as bold. And it's funny because a lot of these solutions that I'm developing, they've actually given me insights about how I could better build a home naturally. The materials that are required are very, very similar. And the principles, like I said, how not to make it mold. It's exactly the same. A home will undergo the same environmental forces that our mouths do. So I think these should be seen as very closely linked and interconnected. In permaculture, there's a design technique that's called permaculture zones or zoning. And this is basically mapping out the different concentric circles that can be created on a piece of land and on a homestead, for example. And it starts with zone 0, which is the individual person. Zone 1 would be like the home or the closely surrounding portion to the home. Zone 2 would be a little bit further out from that, and so on and so forth until zone 5, which is pretty far out, pretty wilderness. And with each zone, it's like there's less and less interaction and maintenance. So the most inner zones are the ones that receive the most attention and are closest to us. And so if zone 0 is our body, then you could call zone 00 our mouth. And I think, yeah, that's just one more parallel that I've found here. The zoning is one of the design techniques that I've utilized in the creation of this channel, and it's something that really relates to what I'm doing here. Other techniques include analytical design, which is basically picking apart the pieces, looking at the individual components of a system, and seeing how those parts can be moved around, interchanged, swapped out, replaced, and put back together into something different for a different function or the same function, just improved. And that's what I've had to do with the dental solutions and dental devices that I've come across in the conventional industry and with these new things that I'm developing. So I've had to pick apart, like, okay, well, a dentist wants to suggest a root canal to me. Well, what are the parts of that root canal? What are the different sections of that root canal? What's in it? And analytical design is looking at those different pieces. And since those pieces aren't sufficient, the design process requires swapping out new pieces. And so I've had to analyze each individual part of what I want to create a larger whole. They say form follows function. I don't know if that's relevant here, but I think like looking at the end point, looking at the final objective, and working backwards from there and dissecting, almost reverse engineering. That's kind of what I'm referring to with analytical design. That's exactly what I've been doing this whole time. Another design technique that I've utilized from permaculture is deduction from nature. This is related to biomimicry. Basically, it's looking out at the natural world and observing and seeing how nature does it, because nature has been doing it for billions of years. So it must have something right. It must be doing something right. And our accumulated human knowledge, particularly modern scientific knowledge, is only a couple hundred years old. It's really like an infant compared to the vast wisdom and intelligence of nature. So we have a lot to learn by looking out at nature, and that's what I did. I saw that there's destruction being created by these human systems, so maybe I should go to nature first and see what it has to offer. And that's how I found nephrite jade. Nephrite jade was created by geological processes over the course of millions of years. That's some good stuff. That's what I want to be using, not something that some scientist whipped up in his lab 2 weeks ago. Like, I'd rather have that Gaian order, form, and organization in my mouth, personally. And also, for example, with the dental cement, it's like we have these teeth that are crystals. They're biological crystals, and if we want to be creating solutions for our teeth, these complex biological crystals, well, maybe we should look at nature's other complex biological crystals before thinking we can do better. Just as an example, wollastonite, which mimics the crystal structure of our teeth, and is a key ingredient to a non-toxic dental cement. And the application of permaculture principles, is another design technique. So I'll get into those principles that I utilized from permaculture soon. But I wanted to mention first that design, what I'm talking about when it comes to design, is an integrated functional conscious process. This is how I'm defining design. Design is not just like, well, I was gonna say design isn't just random assembly of parts, but actually that is a good design technique. You can just throw things together and see if it works, see what sticks, but But if you're doing that consciously to design something, then it's still design. It's still an integrated, functional, conscious process. But what is not an integrated, functional, conscious process is acting on greed, acting against evidence, acting for one's own personal survival, and harming others in the pursuit of that. That's not design. And, well, you could say it's design, but it's bad design. It's just really poor design, and our world is filled with that right now. That's why we have the results on Earth that we do right now. That's why we have all this chaos and things that people would rather not have on Earth right now. Disease, pollution. So what I'm trying to do here is integrate different things that I've learned for function, consciously integrating them for the creation of functional processes and products. So here's the permaculture principles that I've utilized that have aided in the development of this channel and everything that I've talked about here. One principle is creatively use and respond to change. So how this has applied for me, how this came up for me, is it caused a major change in my life when I learned the reality of what dentists were doing to people. And the bleak outlook of any solution that's been offered to me and my fiance in this process of trying to find healthy dental restorations. But instead of letting that destroy me and make me hopeless, I've creatively responded and used that change by developing and inventing. It's all in how we respond, and I also didn't conform. I also didn't just go with the flow and accept what was given to me, even though I know it's not good. I rebelled, and that's a response. That's a choice. We all can take that choice whenever we want. So that's permaculture. And another permaculture principle is use and value renewable resources. This is slightly different than biological and local resources. Renewable resources specifically refers to things that can be regenerated very quickly, that don't take thousands and thousands of years to create. So fossil fuels are non-renewable, metals are non-renewable, but all of the materials that I've suggested using, bioplastics, minerals, hand mined minerals, you could say it's non-renewable, but actually I don't think humans could hand mine minerals at a fast enough rate to use up the Earth's reserves. Talking about dental fillings, it's not that much material, really. And beyond this, crystals can be manufactured. Crystals can be grown in labs. And in the future, my fiance actually suggested this to me, that what if nephrite could just be farmed? We can grow crystals. We have the technology to create crystals, so why can't we do this with nephrite? I think that's genius. That's how a mineral can be a renewable resource. We don't even have to hand mine it necessarily. So, plant extracts, bioplastics from plants, and all of the minerals, the hydroxyapatite from antlers, all of these are renewable resources and do not take a toll on the earth and do not cause downstream pollution by utilizing them if done properly and consciously. And renewable services too, so if people are creating these things using tools that they already have that can be reused and are running on renewable energy, then it's a renewable service. A lot of this stuff can be done by hand too, I believe. Very low-tech processes that I'm suggesting. Another permaculture principle that I've applied is observe and interact. This is a foundation for permaculture design. Typically it's utilized when observing land and trying to decide what am I going to do on this land, what am I going to do on different parts of this land. But in that process, it starts with observation. It starts with just going and being present and taking in information and stimuli and letting that subconsciously process, and then interacting and observing what happens with that interaction, seeing what happens when you start to make small tweaks and those cause effects. And that is what I'm doing here. I started by observing the whole dental industry, observing my own mouth, observing the effects that what's been done to me by the dental industry on my health, on my well-being. It started with observing, then I started interacting. I started trying to reach out to dentists and trying to see what's out there. I started getting surgeries and seeing how that affected me. And you know, it's that same exact process. And one final thing I'll share with you, I'm gonna wrap it up here soon. I learned in my permaculture training that principles are grounded in what works. This is what makes a principle a principle. A principle isn't just a value or a theory or a belief. A principle is a principle because it's been shown to work over and over and over. It's like the equivalent of a scientific law, basically. And so all of those principles that I just mentioned, they actually work. I mentioned them and I was taught them because that is what has gotten humans to the place that they're at today. That's what allows us to survive and reproduce at all. These are inherent things to our nature. And that's why this is such an intuitive process. And I didn't have to go and get a PhD to develop these solutions, because any human is capable of observing and interacting. Any human is capable of creatively using and responding to change. Any human is capable of using and valuing renewable resources and services. Any human is capable of finding local and biological resources to utilize. And it works. When people do this, it works. So if you can also see that what I'm talking about will work, then please join me. If you can see that this direction is where the future is headed, inevitably, because it works, reach out. Comment down below, like, subscribe, share this video with your friends, and stay tuned for more. Thank you for your time.